Hello and welcome to Colleague 7's Sprint Review for 18.04.01. This will cover the work undertaken between the 3rd of April to the 16th of April. Starting with our sprint goal, and for this sprint the goal has been to implement the delete record functionality in line with the right to be forgotten GDPR legislation. This completes the GDPR project, giving Colleague 7 users the tools to be fully compliant with GDPR. So looking at the high-level items and to explain further, in this sprint we've delivered the delete record function, which will completely wipe a record of its associated data and documents, rather than the archive process, which simply removes the record from view. As mentioned, this is so that Colleague 7 users have the tools to comply with the right to be forgotten component of GDPR. As a carryover from the last sprint, the issue with the telephone number on selection screens has been resolved. This existed on the candidate, company and contact selection screens. The insert image option has been added to the template and create letter text editor windows. The reference field, which is used to store your own unique reference number relating to a requirement, has been added to the requirement basic tab. And when archiving a company, it will now automatically in turn archive all associated contacts. We'll now go through a short demonstration on the key features from this sprint. Okay, so the first point I wanted to cover, and it's really the main component of the sprint review, is the delete record feature. So this is the ability to be able to delete a candidate record or delete a contact record, as per the right to be forgotten component of GDPR. Now within Colleague, you'll be able to do that within individually against a candidate record or a contact record, or from the search result. Obviously from a contact search result or a candidate search result. But we've introduced a number of user permissions obviously relating to that, and obviously we have a section within here as well to be able to view the deleted records, not in terms of the content, but in terms of access to the shell records that have been left post deletion. But if I just cover user group permissions to begin with, I'll go into user group there, and you'll see within here that the options have been added here to delete candidate record, delete candidate from search, delete contact record from a search, or delete records, which is access to the admin area, and obviously to view those deleted records in there. So based on these components being enabled to full access, that will grant whether or not you can do these things, obviously on a user group basis. So if I go back to the admin area again and just go into deleted records, this works in exactly the same way as the archive records section. Obviously, in the archive records section, there's you can access obviously the records as you can in this area, but with the archive record, it could be viewed to access them with a view to then restoring them and unarchive them. But in this instance, obviously they're deleted records, and this just gives you the means to view the record entity IDs that have been deleted off the system, when these happened and who deleted them. But you have obviously the option to access those records, but they essentially don't contain any real data other than to just confirm who deleted them and when. But I'll come through. Obviously, go through the actual deletion process of a candidate record just to cover off how that process works. But that's just the new areas of the admin system, or the admin section of the system. If we go to a candidate record, I've set up a candidate record here, essentially primed with data and ready to be deleted. So we've got some history data within here. We've got an associated document attached. We've got some notes in here, some assigned skills. Some custom field data in here as well. We've got an experience record being just a blank unknown experience record type, and I've also associated it to a requirement as well. So we'll show how that will then appear once you've deleted a record in terms of from a requirements perspective. But if we go back to here, off the actual delete record option is off the view more submenu, and just as you've got archive option here, you've now got delete record option there as well. So what you can do is you can select delete record, and then you'll see this alert appear. It will obviously advise what it's planning to do in terms of deleting that record, and as a key point, this can't be undone. So there's not an undo option once this delete record feature has been run. That's kind of the point as part of GDPR, that on the basis of someone requested for their data to be deleted, it's gone and it can't be retrieved. But that's just a key component or key point to note, and thus it's important that assigning privileges to users so that they can run this feature is done so with that in mind. It can't be undone if they do delete the wrong record. Yeah, well, are you sure you want to continue? We'll select yes, and then it will run through the delete record process, and it will refresh the record, and I'll be able to just demonstrate what that then means in terms of the data that's then deleted. Okay, so that's the record gone. So first and foremost, obviously, if you've got mandatory fields set up, obviously all of the mandatory field alerts are going to be triggered. Unlike 6, obviously, the mandatory fields will advise that they're mandatory. It doesn't then prevent you from leaving the record or anything like that. But obviously, those will appear. But as you can see, all of the data has now gone, certainly from the personal record side. The mailshot status is set to allow none by default, and the lookup fields, which don't have a blank option, will have defaulted to the default value of those lookup fields when you're creating a new record. We'll obviously advise the user that it's been deleted and the user and the time that it was deleted. If we go to the history, we'll see that all of the histories have been wiped essentially in terms of their history content. You'll see that there is a new history record that's been created for record deleted, again with a view to just advising that the record's been deleted and when and who did that. If we go to documents, we'll see that obviously the document is now gone, and that was deleted. Notes are gone, skills are gone. Essentially, the record's been wiped, and that's essentially the point and purpose of it all. Now, obviously, this candidate was associated with a requirement, so that link isn't gone in terms of that candidate's association, but they've obviously been deleted from the system. So if we go to the requirement record, and let's refresh this now on the basis that obviously the record's been deleted. And we go to the candidates tab, what you'll see is obviously the candidate has gone. It's essentially the candidate is no longer there to progress through the requirement workflows. It's not something that the user can now view. From the obviously from this perspective, there was an association there, but from within the requirements side of things, you know, it's not a case that you want to progress that candidate forward with any further requirement link or any further requirement workflow. So that's the delete record function in terms of from an individual entity perspective. We obviously have got the delete record option from a search as well. So just to quickly cover that off as well. If I go to let's just bring up, we'll bring up a search just based on some fairly generic data. 13 results, that will do. And what you can do is obviously highlight all the records or highlight just some of the records, and you've got the option of the selected items list of delete records. So you can select those, and obviously it will bring up again the option again to advise it. It does say that this will take a few minutes because when you're deleting candidate records from this type of list, it can be quite extensive in terms of the amount that it's deleting, in terms of the number of history records, perhaps the number of documents against those records. So it can take a little while to churn through those depending on the amount of records that you're deleting. So that's just an extra element to take into account. But you can obviously then run that process to delete those records. The only other thing or factor to be aware of is that the deletion option against both candidate and contact is on the basis that they've not been associated to placements. If there is an association with placements, then the alert warning will appear to advise that the record couldn't be deleted because they're associated to a placement record. Or a number of placement records, and it will advise how many placement records that is. So that's a restriction that we've put in place to date so far, based on the legitimate interest clause, in that fact that if you've taken a candidate through to placement, at that point we've got to a point of back office, of financial data, and it basically being an extra level of complexity relating to your relationship with that candidate, and there being legitimate interest to retain that. So at this time, if a candidate or a contact has been associated with a placement, they're not going to be a record that can be deleted at this time. If anyone has any questions with regards to the GDPR right to be forgotten component, please let me know. But that essentially should cover the means to be able to delete a record, and that's the work that we did as part of this sprint as a main point. The next point to cover relates to the telephone number on the selection screen searches. This was a searching option that has been available in prior releases, but the users have experienced issues with it. So what we've done is just refined it slightly to remove some of the kind of back-end workings that were going on behind it, make it more part of the main code line, and yeah, also as part of doing that, we've been able to introduce an all numbers concept also. So when you are searching a telephone number, this will search across essentially all the telephone numbers that are against a candidate record, and you have the means to it will adhere based on the wildcard options that you might set as well. So either exact match, contains, or begins with. So for example, we could type in 01243 in here, do a search, and it's going to bring back records that have got an 01243 number as a prefix within there. You could obviously also search on an exact match, being a specific number. I've done an exact match search down on the number that I know I've assigned to a load of records, but it will basically find that number against any record, any telephone number against that record. So for example, you'll see a candidate record here that their direct number isn't that number, but if we go into their record, there will be that number in there somewhere. So yeah, so it's available as a home number against the address. So essentially, it's a way of being able to run that search for a telephone number against an entity type and be able to know that it's going to find that number if it's associated anywhere in that record. The same goes for companies, for telephone, and the same for contact as well. This used to be, in terms of wildcard options, this used to be trailing, leading and trailing, and exact match, and that was causing some confusion for users in terms of what each of those naming conventions meant. So we've simplified those naming conventions to be exact match, begins with, and contains, just so that it makes it quite clear what those options are doing when you've selected them. And obviously, based on what you select here, is what the telephone number will honour. We've also obviously got this tooltip mouse over against the telephone label, so that you can just make it quite clear that it's going to search across all contact numbers, all contact telephone numbers when you're doing that search. So that's just an update we made there. Okay, so the next point to cover relates to the insert image option, which was introduced a couple of sprints back relating to emails and email signatures in particular, but we've also now updated all of the other options where you could want to implement this as a solution. So if I demonstrate this against a template as an example, if I open up a template here, basically what we've allowed for is the means in which you can insert an image rather than the older method, which was basically to source in an image from an externally hosted location. You can now basically just upload it as you would expect to. So if we insert an image here, and then just insert, then that image will then appear. We can obviously manipulate that. We can also resize it. And then that image is obviously part of that template, and you can insert as many images essentially as it is appropriate to brand the letter and get it essentially looking as you would like it to look. If we then go to a candidate record, I'll just refresh this record quickly so those changes take effect. And then when going into the create letter option, if we call on that merge template that we just updated, we can see now that that image came through, and obviously within the image, within the create letter option, it's also again got this insert image option. So if you wanted to insert, anything else really within this area, you could choose to do so. Let's find another picture. Terrible picture, but okay, there's the insert image option there, and essentially what you can then do is obviously save, create the document, and those images will obviously come through into that document as you would expect them to. So the means to create a branded, fully imaged letter templates and create obviously documents and templates with images is now fully there within 7. And if I just demonstrate that within here now, we've just created this registration letter, wasn't it? There we go, so you can see it there. Obviously you can download that, and obviously it can be sent as well as an attachment to an email that you would send it on. So that's the update that we made as part of this sprint. Next point, and it's quite a quick point, just relates to the reference field that's now been added to the requirement entity. So the reference field and the purpose of the reference field is to give you a field where you can enter in your own unique reference ID relating to that requirement. So if you're not using the requirement ID numbers and instead you've got your own unique reference number relating to requirements, this is the field that you would use as part of that. And it's obviously a standard field that was part of the 6 system and has also again been introduced here. This field can be set as mandatory as per the standard workflow within the admin area. It's a mergeable field, and obviously it's also a searchable field as well. So if I just type in some text into the reference field, and if I go to the requirements search, you can see that reference is here as a searchable field within the requirement selection screen. I'll just type in test as a demonstration that it honours the wildcard options of begins with, exact match or contain. So we'll say begins with, and then if we search on that, it will bring back obviously the record that we put that reference number against. And it's no more complicated than that really. It's a field obviously designed for your unique reference against a requirement. The last point to cover just relates to the archive process specifically when it's run against the company record. So just as obviously the delete function was introduced to the candidate contact, the archive process has always been there, and that's for candidate, company, and contact. And what you can do is obviously archive a record, and that essentially treats it in a different manner. It hides it from view, but obviously you have the option to restore that record in case you wanted to revisit that company at a later date. What users were seeing is that when they archived a company, that the contacts essentially weren't being archived as part of that process, so it was very much something that needed to be tied off as part of completing the functionality of archiving off a company. So what will now happen is when you archive a company, it will also advise it's going to archive off all of the associated contacts. You hit yes to trigger the archive process, and then the record is archived. And as part of that process then obviously all of the associated contacts are also then archived as well. So if I go into the contact record, it's obviously been archived. What will then happen is in the event that you wish to unarchive the record, it will also restore the contacts that were previously archived at the same time with that company. So what it won't do is restore any contacts that you archived separately outside of that process. So there could be scenarios obviously where you've archived other contacts in that company for other reasons, but as part of unarchiving a company that you've archived, it will obviously restore any of those contacts that were associated with that workflow at that time. So hopefully that makes sense, but that basically just completes the archive process of a company as it should have worked prior in all fairness. But that's the last point to cover in the sprint. As always, if you have any queries or feedback, please get in touch. I'll be keen to hear from you. Also, for those using Colleague 7, feel free to submit your enhancement requests via the support team or directly to me via the above email address. The next video will be the sprint plan for 18.04.02, and as always, this will contain a high-level overview on the items we intend to work on during that sprint. Thanks for watching.